Welcome to Dementia-Friendly Prince George's County, Maryland Northern Sector webinar series for caregivers. Today's topic is Dementia Conversations, Doctor Visits, Driving, Legal, and Financial, sponsored by Prince George's County Government and the Department of Family Services.
So, as I said before, welcome everybody. This is one of my favorite programs because it covers many topics that families and particularly individuals who have just been diagnosed with dementia sometimes struggle with. So, next slide, please. So some of the most difficult conversations that families have are things like going to the doctor. Now, this might even actually be before the person has been diagnosed with the disease, but they're actually showing symptoms of memory loss, behavior, things like that, and how to try and persuade that person to go to the doctor, to see a doctor. So we'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail. Deciding when it's necessary to stop driving. This is a really difficult one. If you think, of yourselves and parents driving for say 60, 70 years, and then perhaps being told that's it, you can't drive anymore because of your dementia. And often people will turn around and say, well, I'm fine. I'm still okay. When really they're not. But we'll cover that in more detail as well. And making legal and financial plans to cover future needs. So we're not going to go into that one in a lot of depth, but we'll talk about sort of as an overview things that need to be considered in the early stages. Next slide. So today's program, we'll actually look at sort of tips on how to break the ice and have the most difficult or most common difficult conversations. Planning ahead and building a care team. Opportunities to hear from people who are dealing with similar issues. Well, unfortunately, because of the videos, I will explain those ones. And then connecting you with helpful resources. Next slide. So what are some of the excuses that you hear and reasons actually that sometimes families and individuals throw up? Well, my sister lives close by and she can help. Well, that's an assumption. Maybe she can't actually help. Maybe she's actually quite busy. She has always been fiercely independent, and if I step in, she'll be offended. Not uncommon for families to feel that way. And that is all sort of linked to actually having that sort of difficult conversation and perhaps taking away part of a person's independence. We're just starting to notice some changes. We're not sure there is even a problem. If you are concerned about somebody, then make a note of them, record them, because there's no point in going to the doctor and saying, I think mum or dad has got a problem with their memory. They're not as good as they used to be. Well, that doesn't actually tell you anything at all. Whereas if you can say, I noticed dad's really struggling when it comes to writing checks now, or he's forgetting to write checks and bills are going unpaid. He's really sort of losing it a little bit there. Then you've got something, some concrete evidence then to actually present. You're busy with your own life. Yeah, aren't we all? And it's easy to say, oh yeah, I really do need to get around to doing that or having that conversation with mum or dad, but I just haven't got time right now, but I'll do it next week. Well, don't let next week come and not do something about it. And then, of course, very common reaction from the individual that you're concerned about is, I'm fine, don't worry about me. And people are very good at masking, hiding their true state. And particularly if you're not seeing the person on a regular basis, if it's just like a telephone conversation that you have, weekly or so, or if you're Skyping with them, FaceTiming, whatever, it's more difficult to actually ascertain what might be going on. And then, of course, you might get the response, well, wait till you're my age. Things are a little bit harder than they used to be. Yes, there is part of what we call normal aging, and people do slow down a little bit. But there could be other factors that are involved here. And obviously, if dementia is one of them, then that's something we need to be concerned about. Next slide. So having those successful conversations Right, sooner is better rather than later. Don't wait for a crisis. In other words, you need to be proactive. You need to be thinking about what's going to come down, later stages of this disease. Right now, you could be in the very early stage, or there might just be some signs that things aren't actually going well. Next slide. In fact, you can click the others and bring the others up. I think there's a couple more to bring in. Okay. So sooner there's better rather than later. Develop a plan for using finesse, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, the finesse bit there is you're being tactful. You're introducing your plan slowly. You wouldn't want to sort of come in and say, Mum, Dad, whatever. I think the time's come for you to go into an assisted living facility. You really seem to be losing the plot here, and we've got to do something about it. Well, you can probably imagine what sort of response you're going to get to that. So there's no finesse involved there. So we would obviously need to backtrack and think about how we're going to have that sort of difficult conversations. As I said there before, take notes about the changes that you see. So if you do go to the doctor, you've got something concrete to present to them. Practice in advance what you're going to say. How many times, any of us, have you prepared yourself for that difficult conversation that you're going to have with a parent, with a child, with a manager, with a friend, and you sort of practice it and you roll it over in your head and think, right, this is what I'm going to say. I mean, invariably it doesn't come out that way, but at least you're getting yourself into that mindset and you're preparing yourself for it. Talk when you're both relaxed and comfortable. There's no point in sort of coming in, you're tired, it's the end of a day, sitting down and saying, okay, Dad, I need to talk to you about your money. Again, you're probably going to get a very negative response from him. He's probably going to be a bit upset, and you're certainly not in the right frame of mind. So again, it's choosing your right moments when you're actually going to have that difficult conversation. But we'll talk more about that. Next slide. So conversations about going to the doctor. Okay, if it's your mother who has got dementia, or if she's showing signs of dementia, and you say, Mum, I think we need to go to the doctor. Well, a barrier to actually going to see the doctor is the actual fear. She knows there's something perhaps not quite right, and she's fearful of what the outcome might be. There could be anger as well. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. I don't need to go see a doctor. It's you the one that's crazy here. I'm fine. Okay, that's a difficult one to work around. And it could also be the stigma. Unfortunately, there is still a stigma attached to dementia, and overcoming that can be a challenge. It can also be then a barrier to a diagnosis, because not all dementias, well, some dementias are reversible. So there could be other reasons that are actually causing the confusion, but without actually going to a doctor and being examined, then that makes it difficult to ascertain. It allows for regular checkups, or it prevents the regular checkups, and obviously prevents medical help if it's actually needed. So how do you get your loved one to the doctor? Next slide. Okay, this is Donna. She was actually talking about the difficulty in actually getting a family member to the doctor and having that sort of conversation with her. So next slide. Okay, click the others to bring them up. Okay, so use words that are most comfortable for the person. You need to go and see a neuropsychologist. You need to go and see a psychiatrist. You need to go and see a neurologist. These are all terms that could really panic a person. Whereas if you actually sort of approached it more gently, saying that let's go and see, your doctor, for a checkup, and You know, they can ask you a few questions. You know, let's see how your memory is actually doing. You know, this isn't a test or it's not a pass fail or anything. It's just really so that we can see, you know, if you are having some difficulty, whether we might be able to help you. And that's a more of a sort of a softer approach. Suggesting Medicare's free annual wellness check visit. You know, you've paid into Medicare throughout your working life. You're entitled to this. So, you know, let's use that. Pair an enjoyable outing with the doctor's visit. You know, Mum, I know you like to go out for lunch, or Dad, I know you like to go out for lunch. I know of this really nice new restaurant that's just opened up in town. So listen, why don't we do the hospital or the doctor's visit first, and then go and have a nice lunch at the restaurant? Again, it's sort of and this is finessing it, if you like. It's a much softer approach. Invite family to communicate concerns and questions to the doctor. If you've got other family members who have actually noticed the signs and symptoms of dementia and are seeing things actually changing, then, you know, inviting them to actually communicate those, you know, and it can be on paper as well. They could perhaps feed into you if you're going to be taking the person to the doctor and say, well, look, these are the things that my family has actually seen. If still reluctant, try using a therapeutic fib. The therapeutic fiblet is great, but it can actually come back to bite you if you're not careful. But used tactfully, it's actually quite a good tactic. Now, so the example here, we're trying to go to the doctor. So if still reluctant, using a therapeutic fib, let's see, what can we do? Well, you know, the doctor needs to see you, Mum, so that they can actually continue prescribing, you know, that medication that you're taking. You know, and I know you particularly like the Ambien for helping you to sleep at night. But you know, unless we go and see the doctor, they're not actually going to be able to renew your prescription. And there may be some truth in that, but what you're doing is obviously encouraging her to go to the doctor because she wants to continue receiving her Ambien. So a little bit of a therapeutic fiblet there. We can also use this later on with driving, and I'll give you an example of that. Next slide. Right, this is probably one of the most difficult conversations. When to stop driving, how to approach the subject. You know, as it says there, have you noticed accidents, traffic tickets, scrapes on the car, mistakes while driving? Some people will recognize that they're actually having difficulty with driving because of their memory and will voluntarily say, you know, I think I need to stop driving. If you've got somebody like that, then you're onto a winner, because usually it's people will say, I'm fine. I don't get lost. I know exactly where I'm going. I just go out of the house, I turn right, I go to the store, and then I come back from the store. I know that route. I've driven it for 50 years. I'm fine. Yeah, well, okay, maybe you have done that for 50 years, but your reflexes might be less reflexes. Losing it here myself. Might not be so finely tuned, shall we say. So instead of hitting the accelerator, perhaps you hit the brake. You suddenly swerve into traffic because something distracts you, things like that. My late mother-in-law was driving beyond the time when she should have been, although we did actually manage to stop her in the end. She was getting a lot of scrapes on the car. She wasn't driving far, although on a couple of occasions she was going some distance. But she was forgetting to put gas in the car. And on one occasion, she was at the supermarket, and it was in the evening, and she had to go in and ask somebody how to turn on the lights of her car. So these were clues that something was actually really wrong here. And my brother-in-law was able to actually convince her to stop driving. So, but how do you actually do it? You know, at what point do you actually have this conversation and say, you know, Dad, Mum, you've got to stop driving? As I say, you know, and this is so much tied up with a person's personality, their character, but the biggest thing of all is their independence. You know, if you stop to think about it, you pick up the keys, you go out, and that's it. You've got that freedom. Now, all of a sudden, you're taking away that freedom from that person. So how do you do that? How do you have that conversation? Next slide. Okay, Chris is talking about exactly what I've done now, is how do you have that sort of difficult conversation to convince his father to stop driving. Next slide. That again. Okay, bring the others up. Oops, go back on. Okay. Right, so plan ahead before an accident occurs. You know that there is a problem or a potential problem. So how are you actually going to, to do something about it? And having that sort of conversation. One of the earlier slides I showed you, there was a topic there about rehearsing, practice what you're actually going to say. So in other words, have a plan in place before you actually sort of have this conversation, with your loved one. Expressing your concern about specific changes, yes, you can highlight those. Appealing to the person's sense of responsibility and concern for others, that may or may not work. A few years ago, I held a care consultation at the Alzheimer's Association office. The whole family came in. They were concerned about, or the man was concerned about his wife and her ability to drive. And we talked all around this. And at the end, she said, "I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with my driving. I'm okay. I'm safe." So no matter how much, appeal there was to this person's sense of responsibility, they weren't having it. So had to sort of go away and sort of think about, okay, what are you going to do next? So planning ahead then, if you're able to, and these are some of the tips that actually families have actually used. Remember what I said about sort of independence. In some cases, families have actually left the car in the garage. And that has satisfied the person because they're aware that it's in the garage. They might see it in the garage. So although they may not be driving, they still have that connection to that vehicle. Other people have actually got a set of car keys that do not fit the actual vehicle, and then give those to the person, maybe on the same key ring that they always had their keys on. Because for a lot of older men in particular, they're quite used to sort of having their car keys in their pocket or their car keys sort of jingling or being able to see them. Again, it provides them that little bit of sense of security that they've still got their car keys, therefore they've still got that ability to drive if they really need to. It's a case-by-case basis because this isn't going to work with everybody. Taking away a person's driving license is obviously very useful. Sometimes the doctors will agree to, and there is a form that they can actually use to send to DMV to have a license withdrawn. Going back to that therapeutic fiblet, this is actually one way you might actually be able to get the person to the doctor as well by saying, well, DMV requires you to have a medical now that you've reached X age, whatever it is you want to use, 75, 80 or something like that. So that's another way that you might be able to approach it. So I say removing a person's license is useful, but what it does not do is actually stop the person from driving. So you take away the license, if they've still got access to the car, then they're still at risk of actually driving it. And again, people can surprise you with dementia. You think, where did they drag that up from? And I certainly remember one case involving the family had actually taken the distributor cap off, and so their father couldn't actually drive taken it off. They disconnected it, so their father couldn't drive it. So he phoned up AAA, and they came out and they reconnected it for him, totally unaware that he shouldn't have been driving at all. So that didn't work. On another occasion, the family actually took away the vehicle, but they didn't take the drive-on lawnmower. So the next thing they found out was that their father was actually driving down a main road on the ride-on lawnmower. So very determined. And with keys and we're driving, I mean, most of us, if probably not all of us, have got a place where we leave the keys, whether it's in a bowl or a little key rack that we hang the keys on when we're not using them. Well, that's worked in the past, but if you've got a member that in the family with you who is at risk of driving and shouldn't be driving, then you need to change that practice and put the keys somewhere else, because we don't know for any reason what can trigger a response from a person. They could be watching, they may not have been driving, they may have stopped driving, they could be watching television, they could be something on the screen that acts as a trigger, or they just happen to walk past the rack where the keys are hanging up and think, oh yeah, car keys, right, okay, yeah, I've got to go to work. Grab the car keys, and before you know it, they're out the door, in the car, and down the road. So, taking precautions like that are obviously very important. Next slide. Okay, Sheila in the safe driving with her father. Next slide. Again. Okay. So planning ahead, as we've already talked about, before the accident occurs. Express your concern about feel the personal sense of responsibility, concern for others. Okay, offering alternate plans for transportation. So this is important, and this is actually tied in with sort of planning ahead before the accident occurs. You know what you're wanting to happen, and that is for your mum or your dad to stop driving. The question is, how do you actually have that difficult conversation with them? Appealing to their sense of responsibility and concern for others might work, but it might actually not work. So if you are at the point where you're actually going to have to do something drastic, like taking the keys away or taking the car away, think about how you're actually going to do this and what sort of conversations you're going to have. So it could go something like, Dad, I mean, particularly now with, since the war in Ukraine, gas prices have actually shot up. And that could be an opening conversation. Dad, gas prices have really shot up now, and it's actually getting more and more expensive to keep your car on the road. Perhaps we need to sort of think about some alternative. And you sort of, you've offered an opener here, and you don't know how necessarily they're actually going to respond. But this is where, if you've done your homework beforehand, and again, knowing, their ability, suggesting that, well, how about using the bus service, the public bus service? They may not be able to use that, so that may not be an option. However, in certain dementia-friendly locations, transit staff have actually been trained in sort of dementia awareness, and so that actually may be a viable option. The other thing to think about then is, are there other family members that you could employ, or do you set up a contract with Uber and have arranged, sort of like a taxi service then? So if Dad needs to go anywhere, he just phones up and they take him. He doesn't have to worry about the billing because you already sorted that out. And if you've got power of attorney, then you can manage it that way. But you're offering him choices though here as well, as you're sort of having that that conversation. Most OTs, and I think it's there's various locations, can actually do a safe driving assessment. So that may be another thing that, well, Dad, you're saying your driving is okay. How would you feel if a professional took you out? And you could go both ways. Yeah, okay, fine, I'll listen to the professional, because sometimes our parents will listen to somebody else rather than us. Or they might say, no, I don't need that. There's nothing wrong with my driving. So you're in a sort of loop there where you're going back, you're still trying to appeal to them, you're still coming up with a plan. I mean, but ultimately, you do have to think about that person's safety And you do have to think about the safety of others on the roads as well. So you may actually just have to make that difficult decision to take away the vehicle. Next slide. Yeah, Wendy recommends using empathy to help with the conversation. You do need to be empathetic. You know, this is a really difficult conversation because you are talking about taking away somebody's independence or interfering with their independence. They're not making things as accessible for them as they used to be. Okay, next slide. So when to start driving, just to sort of summarize there, you know, maximizing independence, what are the options, the choices, you know, and the planning. Okay, the next difficult subject is legal and financial planning. So, you know, we go from the starter that, you know, your mum and dad been married for X number of years. Traditionally, the man has been the sort of the main breadwinner, although that's obviously changing more so nowadays. But if we think of the demographics here that we're working with primarily, and the wife may not have even known how much money her husband made because he probably handled all the bills, the check writing, etc., etc. So, you know, dad is the one who's now showing the signs of memory loss and some sort of confusion. Well, you know, to go in and say, Dad, you know, I'm really worried about your memory and the fact with your checks and all that. Let's sit down and talk about your finances and what you've got in the way of savings, etc., etc. So how do you think that conversation is going to go? Not very well, probably. I'm not talking to you about my finances. Those are private. You don't need to know how much money I've got. I'm okay. I can look after myself. No, you can't, Dad. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so you yourself might actually feel reluctant to bring this up. You know, it is an uncomfortable topic. Nobody likes to talk about money. It can feel terribly intrusive, you know, and disrespectful. You know, here's a person who has managed their finances for X number of years, you know, quite satisfactorily. Now, all of a sudden, you know, you're concerned about their ability to manage them. And you're saying, Dad, you know, I need to step in here and make, you know, some help or help you and make some suggestions and that for you. They are all valid, but it's actually sort of how you talk about it. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Right. Can you bring up the other ones? Thank you. Right. Julie actually uses a nice phrase. She talks about a journey and talks about her friend going on this long journey and that she needs to be there with that person on that journey. And she breaks it down. And what she talks about makes a lot of sense. You know, so for example, does the person have a power of attorney? Do they have an advanced medical directive? You know, what legal, have they got a will? What legal instrument have they actually got in place, or have they actually got them in place? Because the longer you actually leave it as the person sort of progresses through the disease, the harder it's actually going to be. So if somebody has just been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's form of dementia, they're likely to be still fairly cognizant and able to make decisions for themselves. This would be a good time to actually sit down with them and talk about, you know, a power of attorney. If you leave this too long and the person is in, say, like the middle or late stages of the disease, and they don't understand what power of attorney is, and there's no other mechanism involved, then you're looking at guardianship or possibly conservatorship as well, which is a legal process through the courts, and it can be very expensive. So actually having that conversation early on about, you know, power of attorney, and some advice that sort of, you know, based on experience, not personal experience, but other experience, is that it's good to actually have a backup power of attorney. So for example, if the father is the one who needs the power of attorney, and the mother might be the beneficiary or the executor rather of the sort of the power of attorney, that's fine. But if something then happens to the wife, who's going to manage the power of attorney? So actually having two people as sort of agents to act on it is actually quite a good idea. But explaining that you're in this together. Say, look, Dad, as you progress through this journey, as we like to call it, things are going to happen. You might end up in hospital. People are going to ask questions, or I might need to ask questions to know what's actually happening to you, and what form of treatment do you actually need. Without your permission, I can't do that, and then it just makes it more complicated. So, as it talks about here, break the conversation into parts. So that might be one thing to actually have, is the sort of the power of attorney. The advanced medical directive, again, that could be for another day. And explaining there that these are sort of standard plans. You can actually get wills, powers of attorneys actually off the internet. The advice is always, though, if you've got any complex legal or financial situations, then it would be advisable to seek legal help or legal assistance there, rather than perhaps just trying to do it yourself. Next slide. So we talk about a care team. Well, the family is obviously the most immediate one, the ones that sort of gather around you and provide that additional support. Next. You've also got the medical team. That might be the doctor, it might be a neurologist, whoever else is actually involved. Next. It could be peers. People can still function with dementia. They still might have friends, they might have interests that they get involved with. So going out with somebody maybe once a week, a friend who is aware of your situation, can provide some respite then for the carer. So you're involving somebody else then in the plan. When I was in England, I actually was a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Society, which is sort of the equivalent of the association here. And they actually have a program called the side-by-side program. And what it does, it matches a volunteer with somebody in the community who is still able to sort of function and go out. And I was paired with this retired teacher who liked to go to the gym. So I would, every Saturday, I would pick him up in the morning and we'd go to the gym, we'd have a workout, and then I'd drive him home. And this actually gave his wife then some time just, for herself. And it was a really good program. Next slide. Workplace, somebody could still be working in the early stages of the disease. So, how much you share with your workplace colleagues, how much can be actually done, to provide you with the support. At some point, you're probably going to have to make that decision to leave work. But they can actually, assist you if you need things, if it's related to pension or benefits, things like that. Next slide. And community resources, of which there are lots. You're actually taking advantage of one here tonight, listening to me through the Alzheimer's Association. There's a Dementia Friendly America. There's the Area Agency on Aging. So there's a lot of good information actually out there. In fact, probably almost too much information. So, trying to sort of decipher it all can be a bit of a challenge. Next slide. So ways that we can actually help you. Alzheimer's Navigator. I'm not going to go through all of these. The Caregiver Center. The main one there is the 0800 number, 272-3900. That's our 24/7 helpline, and that is available all day, every day, 365 days of the year. And that's staffed by counselors, clinicians, master's level social workers, And, you know, just volunteer. So if it's at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and you've had that really stressful night or day, you can pick up the phone and know there's somebody at the end of the line there who will actually listen to you. Support groups, of which there are a lot around the district, around the area. Education programs, well, this is actually one of our education programs, the Dementia Conversations. And then there are obviously free online education programs as well. And this program that you've just been listening to, you can actually go to our website and at alz.org, and you can actually listen to it again and watch it again. And if you're doing it from home, you'll probably be able to access the videos as well. Next slide. Okay, there's other ways to get involved as well if you're interested. There's the Walk to End Alzheimer's. The chapter actually does 7 walks a year, 3 in Maryland, 3 in Virginia, 1 in DC. The longest day is just gone, 21st of June, and that's an opportunity to do sort of fundraising things. There's advocacy, and also Trial Match, which gives individuals the opportunity to sign up for potential trials to help us find a cure. Next slide. And this is a nice one. Remember, no one can provide all of this support alone. You know, form a care team and talk with family about concerns as they arise. Talking about it is actually good. Some families won't talk about it, and that's where that sort of stigma comes in. They don't want to share with the rest of the world or with friends and family that their loved one is no longer as cognizant, if you like, as they were previously. And it's a shame, actually, because the more people know about it, the more then they can actually support and perhaps understand why a person is actually struggling. And often, you know, caregivers are asked that, or it might be a friend or a neighbor who will say, you know, can I give you a hand? Can I, you know, come in for an hour or so? And caregivers often turn around and say, no, I'm fine. Don't say that. Just say, yes, I'd love it, please. Yes, an hour would be great. And then you can just go out, recharge your batteries, maybe, you know, do something that you haven't been able to do for so long. Because being a caregiver 24/7 is actually very tiring. Next slide. Okay, that concludes my part of it. So we'll turn it over for any questions.